Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So today we're going to be talking about the state of Diablo 4, Season 4, all the massive changes that have taken place, what's good, what's bad, and without further ado, let's hop right into it. All right, so first off, let's get something out of the way. Old characters. Unfortunately, at this point, old characters have been relegated to legacy of the past. There are very few items that are actually worth keeping from legacy characters, and Season 4 represents the beginning of a basically entirely new game, and all of the old legacy items are denoted with a skull on them to let you know that they are legacy items. And if you look at right below it says where the item power is, it does say legacy item. None of the legacy items are compatible with the new Masterworking system. So this is something that you will want to think about and take into account when you're, well, basically destroying all your old items. Now, the added benefit, however, of being able to destroy all your old equipment is that because of the new codex system, you can, of course, activate all of those codex entries into the new system. So, for instance, if I pull up the codex system, which I can't remember what the button is, it's collections, codex of powers. This is the new codex system. As you can see, I've got a lot of codex entries in here that are perfect. These are perfect entries. Basically, how the new codex system works is when you destroy an item, actually destroy it, it goes into the codex and with the ranking that that currently is at. So if you have a perfect codex entry and you destroy it, you will obtain the perfect version of that entry. Unfortunately, this also means that the characters have to be basically completely remade. From the ground up, because if you want to have access to the amazing tempering system and the amazing masterworking system, well, you're kind of just not going to be able to do that with all of the old equipment that you have available to you. Um, Honestly, your best bet is to destroy most of this stuff. Maybe with the exception of like some nice quad defense pants or armors that you have on hand, those might still outperform some of the newer items. But with the exception of those and maybe like some very specific unique items, most of this stuff is now garbage, and you're probably better off just going through most of it and getting rid of pretty much all of the items because you're going to replace pretty much everything that you currently have with the newer items, which are going to be much more powerful. And that's pretty much all I got to say on the Eternal Realm. Now, for the Seasonal Realm, I've made two new characters. I made a Firebolt Sorceress, which was really freaking awesome. I've had a lot of fun with her, and I've also made a Flay Barbarian, which has turned out to be absolutely amazing. It's something that I was working on last season and the season before, and this season it has definitely come to life in a whole new way. But let's get into the game and let's talk about some of this stuff so that I can get you caught up on all the various things that have changed, including Andariel, as you can clearly see there, because that's Andariel. So Andariel is a fightable boss now. She's basically the same rank as Duriel, and she drops basically the same loot as Duriel. So all the NPCs are basically centrally located now in most of the towns. So if you go to a town, you'll find that pretty much all the NPCs are around the same place. The occultist is no longer up here in this little room all by herself, and so forth and so on. The only one that's still kind of out of the way is the alchemist up here, but for the most part, everything is centrally located in this zone. And you're going to notice that all the NPCs have moved all across Sanctuary. As you can see, the blacksmith is over here. You've got the purveyor of curiosities, like peeking out from the edges of the town. And the occultist has her own little laboratory here in the center of the square or whatever you want to call it. Basically, all the NPCs in every single town, all the chests, every single place that you probably remember where all the NPCs are, they've all been moved. And while I can't necessarily say that it's for the worse, it's actually for the better. You will find yourself on many occasions visiting the old locations and cursing because you obviously you don't need to go to the old locations anymore. So, like, see, the occultist isn't here anymore. The old jeweler is here. They moved the occultist here. The purveyor of curiosities was moved from like down there and like up there to over here now. And they basically rearranged all the NPCs into a more centralized area so it's easier to get access to them. Same thing with chests. There's chests pretty much everywhere now, so you can easily access the chest. And I still find myself sometimes going up to the old chest, and people laugh at me, and they're like, "Why are you going up to the old chest? There's a chest right there by the blacksmith." And I'm like, "Well, that's shut up. This is what I'm used to. You guys are rude." Another thing that we have to talk about is gold is very important now. So as you're leveling up, you might not necessarily see this. So, like when you're first leveling up your character, you might have a pretty decent amount of gold. And before too long, you might just be like, oh, okay, well, that's not too bad. I got plenty of gold. I got plenty of gold, right? But when you start getting into the masterworking system, and this is where things start to get nasty, is you start to masterwork items, and every single masterwork will cost you, like, as you can see here, 1,000,000 gold to upgrade this item to the next tier. Now, the Masterworking system itself is a very good system, and it basically involves the process of upgrading an item through 4 ranks, and there are 4 tiers in each rank, which is a total of 12 rankings. And when you get to the 4th rank, you get a 25% increase on 1 affix on the item. Now, when I hold my mouse over this, you'll see that one of the affixes is blue, and now I have 2 affixes that are blue because I'm currently at rank 8. Which means I've just worked into the Nethiron stage. And you can see in the Nethiron stage, just for the first upgrade, it costs 2,000,000 gold. So 1,000,000 to get to the Nethiron stage, 2,000,000 to upgrade the first tier, and so forth and so on, until eventually it gets to the point where it's pretty rough, if I'm being perfectly honest, because the amount of gold that you need for this, and then on top of that, like, you might want to reset the item. So you might get all the way to the end, and you might decide that, well, the 25% bonuses didn't really apply to what I actually wanted, and you might want to reset the item and do it another time. Well, it's going to cost you 5,000,000 gold for that. You might get to the end with a relatively large amount of gold, but when you get to the end and you start masterworking your items, you're going to realize really quickly that the gold cost in this game has gone up tremendously. Everything from masterworking your item to potions to repairing your equipment. Gold is definitely a lot more expensive now than it was before. On top of this, it's also very expensive to convert materials down to other amounts. So converting Ingol to Obdusite, which is the upgrade material, is only 100,000. It's 300,000 for the bigger box with Nethiron, and then you've got your Obdusite, the medium Obdusite cache from Ingolith is 500,000, and so forth and so on, and it just kind of like builds up from there. And as you can see, like, trying to convert down your Nethiron in the highest box is 6,000,000 gold. And you can imagine that it won't take very long to burn through my little measly 23,000,000 gold when the stuff is costing 6,000,000 gold and 2,000,000 gold and 1,000,000 gold a pop, like, throughout the entire game. So I would recommend that you get as much money as you can. Don't leave those rare items on the ground. Don't leave those magic items on the ground. Bring them back to town and sell them. Make sure you're destroying, of course, your items that are going to go into your codex. But for the most part, it looks like you're going to need to sell a lot of stuff. Speaking of materials that are hard to come by is the royal anythings. So if you want to make a royal anything, it's going to cost you 10,000 fragments, and getting 10,000 fragments is pretty difficult. So far, I have collected a decent number of fragments along the way, and I still don't really have any royal rubies. I don't have any royal topazes. Of course, I could probably destroy some of my current ones to get enough to create 1 royal topaz, but is making 1 royal topaz really going to be worth the, like, all my other items not having any topazes in them? They definitely made it difficult to get your hands on this, and on top of that, when you look at the price, it's 1,000,000 to craft a royal topaz. So they've upped the cost of pretty much everything toward the end game. Now, I haven't really talked about the masterworking system in detail, but let's talk about this for a second. So the masterworking system is not really something that you get access to until the end of the game. Basically, how this works is in Saragar, there is a special location called the Pit. It's basically a copy of, like, the Diablo 3 glyphs, greater rifts from Diablo 3. And you need a special material, which you'll usually have more than enough of by the time you get to this point. and you can activate this to create these rifts. And each tier is relegated to a specific material. So as you can see, Opticite starts at tier 1 and ends at tier 30. Ingolith starts at tier 31 and ends at tier 60. And Neath Iron starts at tier 61 and goes up and up from there. There's nothing else. It does require 3 rune shards to make the portal. But as you can see here, I currently have 482 rune shards, and I don't really foresee that becoming a lower number anytime soon, because they seem to drop everywhere. Whisper caches, HellTides, Legion chests, Nightmare dungeons, world bosses. So as long as you're participating in the game, you pretty much have an infinite amount. Now, the reason why the Masterworking system is not accessible until you get this is because you need this material to actually use the Masterworking system. To activate the pit, you have to have at least a world tier, or say a Nightmare dungeon. I think it's 45. So you have to have completed Nightmare dungeon 45 to get access to the pit. And then once you get access to the pit, and once you start farming the pit, you can definitely get your masterworking materials, and you can start masterworking your items up to increase their overall statistics, which is pretty nice. But because it's relegated to basically the end of the game, from levels like 1 to 70, you're probably not even going to touch the pit. Now, once you actually do get into the pit, it's pretty much just a timed-based event. You have to kill all the monsters, and then as soon as you kill the aforementioned limit of monsters, you then have to kill the boss. The boss is actually really annoying in higher tiers because it's filled with chaotic events that are happening on a regular basis that have no bearing on the boss himself. So, like, for instance, the boss can get staggered, but all the chaotic events will just keep happening. And it's pretty stupid, honestly, how many chaotic events are inside the bosses. Now, when you go at lower tiers, you won't really care because most of the stuff won't one-shot you or kill you. But when you start getting into the higher tiers, those chaotic events have a tendency to absolutely annihilate you from existence on a whim, as if they were a random god that had come along and was like, "Begone, mortal." So you think you'll find that, like me, the early levels are relatively easy, but then when you start getting into the higher levels where things are one-shotting you like crazy, it's, yeah. Equipment itself has changed drastically too. Like, I feel like we need to talk about equipment. So equipment has been changed to essentially only legendary and unique items. Rare items have gone the way of the dinosaur. They are no longer useful because they only have 2 affixes on them. So if you take a look at a rare item, it only has 2 affixes total. Now, you can take a rare item and you can put it in the tempering system, and you can temper affixes onto the item. You can temper 2, which means that you can have a total of 4. Whereas legendary items have a total of 5 through the tempering system. Now, this pretty much means that rare items have absolutely no place in the end game because they cannot have the maximum number of affixes, and they also do not drop with greater affix rolls like the legendary items do. And the unique items can also drop with these greater affix rolls. So basically, rare items are unfortunately garbage at this point. You can utilize them to level up, you can play with them, you can have fun with them, but eventually you are going to replace them with legendaries, and the legendaries are going to be 10 times, if not 20, 30, 40 times better because of the crazy affixes that they can have on them. I mean, if you take a look at my mace here, I've got a 216% damage over time, a 3,144 maximum life, and a 276 strength. So a rare item would be missing any of those, and each one of those is extremely powerful by itself. Now, the tempering system itself is actually pretty amazing. I feel like we should probably talk about the tempering system since I've kind of worked my way into it. And basically how the tempering system works is you put an item up, and you can choose between 2 different categories, or actually sometimes multiple categories, but 2 different affixes. If you put 2 different affixes on an item, you are limited to the categories that they offer you for that item. So as you can see, the categories change as I put different items up there, and there are certainly some that are extremely powerful, and there's some that are kind of poopy. Let me grab a blank item, a couple blank items here, so that we can play around with this. What am I doing? I need gold. I'm crying slightly. Alright, so let's grab a little handful smattering of items, and we'll play around with this as an amulet. Alright, So when you put items up on the tempering system, you have a choice of a bunch of different options. As you can see here, I've got offensive, defensive, resource, mobility, and utility. Now when you click on these, you have access to tempering manuals that you find throughout the world. Tempering manuals seem to drop from just about everywhere. You can get them from HellTide, you can get them from the Maiden in the HellTide, you can get them from world bosses, you can get them from Nightmare dungeons, you can get them from quests, like through the quest lines. There will be specific tempering manuals that will come from, like, completing certain quests. The season had some tempering manuals in it, the season completion. And basically what you have access to here is going to specifically determine, what you can put on the item. There are also, the tempering manuals also come in 3 different types. There is the blue tempering manual, which is the weakest form of the tempering manuals. There is the rare tempering manuals, which is the medium. And then finally, there is the legendary tempering manuals, which you will find, which have the highest modifiers on them. As you can see here, my natural motion only has a 10% movement speed, but my barbarian motion has 12.5% movement speed, because my barbarian motion is a better version than this one. And you can clearly see right here, it says rare, and this one says legendary, letting you know what tempering manuals you have access to. Most of the tempering manuals that I have access to are legendary, but there are tempering manuals that I don't have access to. And if you'd like a full list of all the tempering manuals, if you head over to Diablo 4.life, we do have all the tempering manuals up on Diablo 4.life. You can go to resources, tempering, and you can sort through these at will. So you can go to like the barbarian, the druid, the necro, the rogue, sorc, and it also shows them by category. So if you go to weapon, you can see there's 4 tempering manuals for the sorceress. Basically each one of these tempering manuals, you have some pretty crazy things. Now, it's been my experience that some of these are kind of lackluster, especially if you're doing specific builds. But there's usually something good in here for everybody, which is kind of interesting. So no matter what you happen to be working on, like, for instance, maybe you want kick cooldown reduction, or maybe you want Warcry cooldown reduction, or maybe you'd like some way to, have more resource regeneration, so basic resource regeneration. These abilities are actually pretty interesting. Like, there's things that give you bonuses to your toughest nails and outbursts from thorns. You can get chances to do stuns, immobilize, and freezes. You can also get pluses to your passives, all sorts of very interesting things. There's also thorns on here, which is nice. And overall, when you start looking through all these and you start finding all the manuals, you'll definitely see that there's some very interesting things in here. My personal interpretation of this, however, is that some of the more powerful tempering affixes are definitely ones that you're going to build characters around. So, for instance, if I take a weapon and put it in here, you'll notice the weapon tempering affix. So the weapon tempering affix is going to give you access to things like rend size, rupture size, flay duration, which my entire character is built around flay duration, by the way. My flay currently lasts 15.93 seconds, which is kind of insane, and I can continually stack flay for a very long time. Pressure point, expose vulnerability. You can also go with Dust Devil damage, chance for Dust Devils to cast twice, Dust Devil size, ground stomp size, leap size, earthquake duration, which is one I want to play around with. Berserking augments. You can get like double swing size, whirlwind size, frenzy duration, which is really nice if you're running frenzy, because the frenzy, the duration of frenzy's buff that actually keeps you, defensive, like gives you really nice damage reduction and also increases your attack speed and whatnot. That one doesn't really last very long, so having it last longer is actually really nice. And I've been playing around with that with Flay too, because Flay also has a damage reduction, so 3% damage reduction and 605 thorns for 3 seconds. And my Flay duration actually does affect it does increase the damage reduction time as well, so I get that nice 12% damage reduction for about 10 seconds instead of 3, which is way better. Way better. There's also bash cleaves, which is really nice, so it turns bash into a cleaving attack, and so forth and so on. And as you go through here, you'll find tons of various things. In fact, let's pull up the page again, and I can show you some of these weapon ones that are just absolutely game-changing for certain characters. Like we already did Barbarian, so let's take a look at the Druid. The Druid has things like chance for Earth Spike projectiles to cast twice, chance for Landslide projectiles to cast twice, chance for Boulders to cast twice, which would be great for Dolmen Stone, obviously. There's also these have been kind of nerfed a little bit, but Maul size is really interesting too, because Maul is an ability that attacks a a kind of a okay, decent area, but you can make it bigger, and you make them all attack more monsters at once, which is really neat. Grizzly Rage duration is really nice too, and pulverized size. There's tons of various things like rabies duration. That one is probably pretty crazy too because it increases the duration of your poisons. On the Necromancer, we have some crazy things like Blight projectiles casting twice, Sever projectiles casting twice, chance for Necromancer skeleton mages to protect cast twice. And speaking of the Necromancer, we got Bone Splinters and Bone Spear as well. The Necromancer's minions are extremely powerful now. Minion builds are all the rage this season, and if you ever wanted to make a really powerful minion Necromancer, now is the season to give it a try. As you can see, Rogue also has some pretty crazy ones like Puncture Projectiles cast twice, Heartseeker, Forceful Arrow, Barrage, Rapid Fire, Penetrating Shot casting twice. There's also Caltrop size, duration, Poison Trap duration, Traps arm faster. There's tons of various things in here that can definitely change the way that you build a character. The Sorceress also has the same thing. She's got Frostbolt, Projectiles cast twice, Frozen Orb, Ice Shards, Firebolt, Fireball. There's also Sparks, Chain Lightnings, Charge Bolts, and Bolt Lightning, all of which are going to do really crazy. There's also this interesting one called Teleport Size, which is going to massively increase the Oculus builds, utilizing the Nova effect. So you can get some pretty crazy Nova damage from your Oculus and make it get really large so you can hit more monsters with each teleport. It's pretty neat. Overall, the tempering system is an amazing system that I was originally very skeptical about. But let me explain the tempering system to you in a way that makes sense for everybody and anybody who's listening. When you find an item, the item will generally have a certain number of stats. And in the old system, when you found an item, a lot of the times the stats that you would have on an item would be terrible. Like, who in the world is using those stats? Like, that's basically what people would think to themselves. Like, nobody wants those damage on Tuesdays things. But when you look through the stats that you can add with the tempering system, a lot of these are damage on Tuesday's stats, like Ground Stomp cooldown reduction. Who is that useful to? Only people using Ground Stomp are interested in that. So what the tempering system has really done is it has taken all of the garbage stats, all the damage on Tuesday stats, all the things that were only useful to a very small subset of the population. You know, like for instance, I might get excited about Flay duration, but 99.9% of the people playing the game are probably not using Flay or really care much about it. So when it comes to Flay duration, if that were to roll randomly on pieces of equipment, well, who's going to be excited about that but me? And that's kind of what the tempering system has done, is it's taken all of those aspects, all of those things that were kind of like, hey, meh, who really wants that? Maybe like one guy in the whole game wants that. And it's put it into a system where you can pick and choose through them, like, you know, sifting same grains of sand through a sifter. And once you find what you're looking for your specific build, you choose that and you put that on your item, customizing it to your own self. But the thing is that you're not finding them in that silly state. So you're not finding items with these things like stun duration on them, and you're not finding items with things like thorns on them, or outburst, or tough as nails, because you're putting those on there specifically. So you can see on some of my equipment, I have things like tough as nails and berserking damage. I've got things like resistances, like specific resistances that I need to like cap out my character's res. I also have things like Wrath of the Berserker cooldown, which would help me out tremendously because I'm using Wrath of the Berserker, but obviously wouldn't help very many other characters. And as you customize each piece of gear to your character, the tempering system starts to really kind of come to life, and you really understand exactly what it's for. What it's for is to give you the ability to find cool equipment that has stats that cannot be changed. And of course, you can still reroll one stat, but let me make it clear that if you reroll a greater affix, it no longer becomes a greater affix. I've done it before on accident. That was very sad. But you can reroll one affix on the item, which means you're still stuck with 2 out of 3. And if you find a greater affix, a 3 greater affix item, you're stuck with all 3. You can't change any of them unless you want to lose a greater affix. So you can still find items. You still have the excitement of finding really powerful items. But the tempering system allows you to customize that item to your specific purposes. Like, for instance, with this, I've got damage over time, life, and strength, and I threw on flay duration and berserking damage because that gives me a pretty nice damage bonus. With berserking, helps out the blood rage passive, which I might even have too much berserking damage. I could probably tone that down a little bit. We'll see. I might have to like play around with it and see how much I need. But I digress. Being able to customize the item specifically to your build is massive. It's absolutely massive. And a lot of people are going to have fun with this, playing around with customizing the items specifically to what they need. Like Leon was talking about this one the other day, which is when you put your items up here and you go to the utility, a lot of these utility options don't really seem like the best in the world. However, he was talking about how crowd control duration actually affects things like challenging shout, because challenging shout is considered a crowd control. So if you put crowd control duration on your equipment, your challenging shout lasts longer, and since when challenging shout is up, the monsters do less damage to you, it helps your damage reduction tremendously to throw a little challenging shout on there, a little crowd control duration, because it's going to increase in general your overall defensiveness. It's actually a pretty neat way to think about things. And a lot of this turns out to be very specific to your specific class. Very specific. Moving on for the tempering system, let's talk about some of the other things. World bosses still die in 2 seconds. Not really much to talk about that. Players are dishing out massive amounts of damage, and the world bosses still can't keep up. I don't know why they can't fix this. I feel like they're deliberately not fixing it, because if they... I feel like they could have fixed it ages ago, but they haven't. However, you're still going to have to do world bosses on a regular basis, because one of the materials that has been made exceedingly rare is the scattered prisms. As you can see, I only have 11 total here, and honestly, it was a fight to get these. Scattered prisms only seem to drop from world bosses and from occasionally the Legion events. Not guaranteed, but they do drop from Legion events. So world bosses and Legion events will give you scattered prisms. For the longest time, I did not have any sockets in my equipment. As you can see, I still don't have a socket in my other weapon here, and I need to go add an additional socket. Burn one of my precious scattered prisms. Ooh. It hurts so bad. It hurts so bad. There. Now I got some extra topaz in there. In general, though, when it comes to world bosses and Legion events and all that, they're still pretty easy, depending on your character. But, of course, a lot of them, like the Legion events are made for EXPing, and world bosses, I don't know why they're still so easy. It makes no sense. HellTides, on the other hand, are extremely fun. If you haven't played in a long time, HellTides are actually up pretty much all the time now. They're basically on the hour, every hour, like 5 minutes plus or whatever. Can't remember the exact timing, but basically there's only like a 5-minute gap in between HellTides. HellTides have some pretty amazing features these days. There are things like the Profane Mind Cage, which I do want to talk about the Profane Mind Cage. So the Profane Mind Cage actually increases the level of all the monsters and makes things more difficult, as well as increasing the drops that they give, which is really nice. So when you find a monster in the HellTide, you'll notice that the monster levels are, you know, I think it's like plus a certain amount of yours up to a certain level, and then it starts to die off. Let's hop out of here real quick so I can find any monster. So here we go. We got some monsters here. These are level 95, 96, as you can see. Now, if I put the Profane Mind Cage on, now they are level 105, and they're a lot higher level, and they drop better loot, and they give more centers, and they give more doojanks in general. And this character is pretty OP, by the way, so don't judge the game by this character, because I've really like started min-maxing the crap out of this guy. I one-shot Kickstarts with this guy. He's kind of insane. Now, the HellTides are really fun for a lot of reasons. Number one, there's a lot of monsters. A lot of monsters. Number two, they added a gauge, which basically allows the HellTide to build up on you, and once it builds up to a certain point, it actually causes the HellTide to attack you with a large number of monsters. They also incorporated a lot of the features from the vampire events. So, like, for instance, this is one of the vampire events from Season 2 that everybody loved. It's basically an event that it kind of like you have to stay inside the circle for a given period of time, and the longer you stay in the circle, the more monsters come, and the more monsters come, the harder it gets, and the more damage you take, and eventually it gets to the point where, you know, it culminates in like a massive attack, And if you can survive, you get really good rewards from these. These are the fun little events from Season 2. And I think this one is specifically was one of the trap towers from Season 3. And honestly, these are really fun to play around with, and you get really good rewards from doing these. Another thing that's really important is that the bar, as you can see, it slowly fills up. And if you have multiple people in the same group doing an event like this, and then all of you trigger your timer at the same time, plus an event like this, it can get absolutely insane to the point where you just have so many monsters on the field of battle at any given time, and it gets ludicrous to the point where you just start laughing insanely as you desperately try to survive. And you might think that monsters in the HellTides actually can't kill you, but I've actually been playing around with this, and I've died a couple times in the HellTide. There are some surprises in here that can kill even some of the more tanky characters, especially the Maiden of Pain, which is one of the central events in the HellTide. And basically the Maiden of Pain is summoned by using these stones up here. As you can see, I currently have 83 of them. And you put in the stones and summon the Maiden of Anguish or the Maiden of Hell or whatever. And by doing so, you get some pretty nice rewards. Speaking of rewards, one of our guild members has actually gotten a grandfather from one of these events, from the Maiden. So obviously it seems like the Maiden is pretty good to farm. She also drops a lot of greater affix rewards. And in general, the Maiden is actually pretty decent. To find the Maiden, usually if somebody summons her, there's a indicator on the minimap telling you that she's been summoned. But if you can't find it that way, what you're usually looking for is a skull on the map. You'll usually see it pretty prominently. It's a giant white skull. And you might have to ride out around a little bit and find it. But once you find it, you'll find a demon summoning circle. There it is right here. There's actually multiple of these in HellTide. And you put the Baneful Hearts in there, and it starts the event, which summons the Blood Maiden. And honestly, the Blood Maiden is really cool. I think she's one of the best additions to the HellTide in a while, and a lot of people will just sit here and fight the Blood Maiden for a very long period of time. As you can see, it currently says, "The accursed ritual has begun." Let me mute this while I'm talking to you guys. That way we don't have the sound of this messing with everything. But basically, when you do the ritual, everybody can participate. However, you do get better rewards when you are one of the people that has put a Baneful Heart into the machine, into the machinations. And you have to fight tons of monsters until eventually the Maiden comes, and the Maiden is actually pretty tough, up until the point where I got like my endgame equipment and I started really focusing on endgame stuff. She could kill me quite a few times if you stand still for too long. If you're a little too complacent, she definitely has some attacks which will burn through your HP pretty quickly. And I think a lot of people have fun fighting her. It's definitely a nice, fun event, but as you can see here, I don't have much trouble with her anymore because I have min-maxed the crap out of my character, and that was with the Profane Mind Cage. And when you kill her, she does have a good possibility of dropping greater affix items, which I found to be very fun. Like, for instance, I got a nice 2 greater affix roll here with 27% movement speed, 32 life on hits. That's actually not bad. I'll hang on to that. Should give me anything else good? Got a couple little items in here from before. I'm going to take all these rares back to sell them, because rares are exceedingly valuable as a revenue source. All in all, the HellTide has been absolutely insane, and I've had a lot of fun playing with it. Let me go open up a chest before I leave here. And I'm trying to think what else I can talk about in terms of the game. You get attacked by everything. There's giant worms that pop up. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that happens in the HellTides now. It's absolutely nuts. Even just opening up a chest a lot of the times causes like tons of monsters to dogpile on top of you. Sometimes I have trouble even just getting back to town because of how crazy the HellTides are now. And rightly so. I mean, it's a freaking HellTide. It should be freaking hellish, right? There's a lot of new unique items in the game. A lot of the new unique items are pretty cool. I actually really like them. The things like the Fractured Winter Glass, the new Flame Weaver gauntlets, I haven't got my hands on materials yet. I really would like to, but I've not had the fortune to get that. I did, however, find a Shaco. I got that from Duriel. And speaking of that, because I was talking about how certain uber uniques are coming from non-Duriel sources, I've also seen a Shaco come from a pit. It was like a pit level 67. I've seen a grandfather come from, as I said earlier, the maiden dropped a grandfather. So uber uniques actually are dropping outside of normal, like uber Duriel and uber Andariel areas now. I've also heard that the uber unique drop rate for the tormented bosses is actually much higher too. And speaking of the tormented bosses, basically all of the bosses have a tormented mode, and you can summon them in the tormented mode by getting special materials to do so, and spending more of the materials that you would otherwise have spent. So for instance, with Varshan required one of all of the organs to be able to summon Varshan, and now when you go to summon Varshan, the tormented version, what you're going to see is that it requires 3 times the materials. So you'll need 3 malignant hearts, 3 gurgling heads, 3 trembling hands, and 3 blackened femurs. But you'll also need 1 very rare material, which I've actually not had a lot of luck coming by. It seems to drop very rarely from the pit, and most of the time when I've gotten it, it's actually been through quest rewards and things like that, which is actually kind of interesting. So when you're playing like the season journey, or when you're doing the Iron Wolves quest, you'll get some from there. But basically, as you can see, I only have 2 of them so far, which is these right here, these Stygian stones, and they are actually kind of rare. The Malignant Altar will have a second option, so instead of the original Varshan option, you'll have another one, which is the Tormented Varshan option, and you can see it requires 2 Stygian stones as well as 3 of all the materials. These Tormented bosses are a lot more difficult than the originals, and they basically have a stack system. A stack system is basically where if you make a mistake, you get a stack. The stack increases the damage that you take, and having 1 stack is not going to immediately kill you. It's not going to immediately cause you a death. However, building up multiple of these stacks will often end in your death. So 1 stack is fine, 2 stacks is usually fine, 3 stacks is usually fine. But once you start getting into 4 or 5 or 6 stacks, it gets to the point where you're probably going to end up dying relatively easily to even just the most minute of attacks. It's basically a system that punishes you for your mistakes, and it does so in a way that doesn't immediately punish you for your mistake. But as your mistakes start to mount, you definitely will notice that you're not going to be able to complete this because of the number of mistakes that you've made. Now, speaking of unique items are a lot less useful than they were before. It's fair to say that the tempering system is so powerful and so amazing that you're probably not going to be incorporating a lot of uniques into your build. And it really comes down to the fact that the tempering system has some pretty amazing build-enabling features. And any unique that you put inside your build is going to disable that specific slot from being able to use those build-defining and build-enabling features. The only uniques, honestly, that are worthwhile using at this particular point, in my opinion, are things that are build-enabling, or uber uniques. Uber uniques are still extremely powerful. But, for instance, Ramalani's, as you can see, is one of the only uniques I have on this build. I'm playing around with the idea of using X-Falls, but I'm not entirely sure I want to. It's one of those uniques that's decent for, like, clearing trash, but I'm not really sure it's better than, say, a lot of the other stuff that I could potentially be using. I'm not sure. It's an option that I'm considering, because quite honestly, my ring is pretty powerful as it is, and X-Falls doesn't really give me a lot of extra power. It just gives me like a little pop every now and then, which helps with trash mobs. I guess that's kind of what I need, though, is help with trash mobs. But overall, you will be using a lot less uniques in your build than you have ever been used, especially weapons. Weapons are definitely the exception to this rule, in that while you might consider using like a unique pants or unique helmet or something, or maybe even a unique ring or amulet, pulling one of your weapons is going to be excruciatingly painful, especially for like Barbarian that has 2-handers, or for classes that have relatively no weapons, because the modifiers that you can get, like the ability to double effects and things like that through weapons, is absolutely insane. Like being able to increase the flay duration is insane for my damage output. Being able to like double your dust devils, like there's tons of various things that you can do that will increase your build tremendously. And so giving up one of your weapon slots for a unique item is rough. It's pretty rough. In fact, I think pretty much all of the unique weapons, for the most part, are kind of like SOL at this point. Like, I can't see myself using Ancient's Oath or Overkill or Butcher's Cleaver. I'm using Ramalani's, and the reason why I'm using Ramalani's is because of the massive multiplier that it has on it. I can't really come close to that with the effects on the weapon modifiers, but a times 4 multiplier from Ramalani's built properly is definitely a lot more powerful than the modifiers that I can get. And that's kind of where I'm at, is that, you know, you look at the uniques and you're like, okay, is it build defining? In other words, is this the thing that enables my build to do what it needs to do? And if it doesn't, well then I'm probably not going to use it. And that's kind of sad, because you get a lot of unique items here that kind of need to be rebalanced a little bit, because they're not really set up properly for the world that they find themselves in, which is kind of sad. It's just not really the best place for unique items now when you can highly customize all of your equipment. And of course, I'm kind of like going off on a rant, but you guys understand what I'm saying, though. I'm sure you guys do. I'm sure that you do. What else is there to discuss on this? We already talked about the codex system being amazing. Older uniques feeling lackluster. New uniques are a great addition. Tormented bosses are fun. Rares are useless. Greater ethics system makes you look forward to drops. We talked about that. HellTide's fun. World bosses still die in 2 seconds. I think we're pretty much done. I mean, overall, Diablo 4 Season 4 feels like an entirely new season, an entirely new game. If you haven't played since Season 0, Season 1, Season 2, or even Season 3, I hate to say it, but the game has changed. It's like a completely new game now. The tempering system has enabled new builds that were not possible before, like a firebolt build or a flayed barbarian. It has made some very interesting and fun ways that you can overly customize your character to specific purposes. Razor Plate has been buffed up like crazy. Thorns in general has been buffed up like crazy. All the minions have been buffed up like crazy. Like, I can't even talk about that enough. Like, every single minion build, druid minions, necro minions, freaking even like barbarian and like other class minions, like sorceress minions, anything that counts as a minion inherits 100% stats now and is extremely powerful. I've heard that golems are hitting in the billions and all sorts of crazy stuff. Overall, I got to give this season a very high rating. I don't really know what the hell I would rate it, but it's definitely a good season. There are some negatives, though, so I'd like to talk about the negatives real quick and what those are. So first off, leveling has become extremely easy, to the point where level 100 is about as easy to hit as it has ever been. I think the world record right now is like 3 hours to level 100. If that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what. Level 100 is really not even the end game of the game anymore. So once you hit level 100, it's really a whole grind to get your masterworking and your tempering and find your greater affixes and have fun destroying like the uber bosses and getting your character to the highest level of the pits and so forth and so on. There's definitely something to be said here for kind of a negative, that the leveling experience has kind of been nerfed into nothingness, while at the same time, the leveling process isn't the end game anymore. So getting to level 100 isn't like the end of your journey. It's only the beginning of your journey to try and cap out your character's power level through a myriad of various sources, like, for instance, the masterworking system and the tempering system, getting yourself a triple rolled greater affix, as well as, believe it or not, you can also find quad rolled greater affix uniques. And you can even find greater affix uber uniques, which is not something that I've done yet, but I'm sure it's kind of insane when you do find one. Trying to think of any other negatives I can think of. It has been a little bit laggy this season. I'm not exactly sure why. I'm getting some chopping, some like freezing, and some other things. It's a little odd, but overall it's been decent. And oh, I almost forgot something. I don't know why I forgot this. All items are tradable now except for Uber Uniques. So Uber Uniques are the only items that are account bound. Everything else within the game that is a legendary or even a unique item, as long as you don't do anything to it. So if you take it over to the tempering system and you start playing with it, then it's going to bind it to your account. But every single item in the game can be traded with other players, and it has opened up the game tremendously in terms of being able to swap items back and forth with other players, which is freaking great. A lot of my items have actually come from other players, which has been really fun. We look out for each other. We find legendary items that have the greater affix rolls that people are looking for, and we swap them back and forth. It's been absolutely insane. This open trading system has definitely brought a new familiarity, like online with your friends, you know, because like before you couldn't really trade any uniques, you couldn't really trade any legendary items, and it was really difficult to, you know, help out your friend with stuff. Now, since you can trade everything, I mean, not only can you trade legendaries to them, obviously giving them the legendary item, but also you can look out for perfect affixes, and you can trade those affixes to people, and then they can destroy them and add them to their codex. You can give them unique items, you can trade unique items with people, and overall, it's been an absolute blast being able to finally, you know, help out all my teammates and my guildies, my guild mates. I think that's pretty much it. It's a very good season. I think it's worth giving it a try. If you haven't tried Diablo 4 since season whatever, and you've been waiting for the season to come back and to have fun playing the game, I think this is the season that you should give it a try again, because you're going to have a blast with all the customization options for your character, all the double attacks, all the the duration increases and size increases and cooldown reductions and everything else that you can customize on your character to get exactly what you're looking for out of your particular build. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me for these fun adventures, and keep watching.